Attendance here has been sitting at 22 for a little while, if that's true. And so no one new has joined recently. So we'll just get moving, I think. And if people show up, they can figure out what's happening. Quick agenda. So settle in time is going on right now. This event is to introduce some of our members and other members of the public to some of the projects we're working on. Mostly our projects are being worked on by interns or students. And I wanted to show off some of their work and let you know about the projects and find out. And then if people are interested in getting further involved or finding out more, there will be opportunities to do that. So yes, that is the event, and it's about maps. So we have 3 projects we're going to talk about: the parking minimums map, the parking benefit district playbook, and grade, and a project which we had, which was to like grade parking. It's somewhat similar to the maps project. And then we can have a few minutes to at the end if we want to, if there's any questions people have, and then we can have social time if people feel like that, and if we're not running over too much. So with that said, we will start with the parking reform map project. This, many of you may be familiar, or if you are familiar with this, I'm guessing most people are familiar with the this map on the Strong Towns website. If you're not, if you type in Strong Towns parking reform, parking reform map, you'll come to a map on a map of cities that have made progress on removing their parking minimums. This map has been around for what, 6-7 years? Daniel, do you know?
6 years. Yeah, I think we launched it in 2015.
Right. Okay. So and I'll have an introductions in a second where Daniel can introduce himself, but he's currently managing this map on Strong Towns. So this map's been around for a while, and it's helpful and exciting to see a lot of places that have reduced the minimums or are working towards that. But when you click around, the information is, it's sometimes verified, sometimes not. Sometimes it said, a city will have passed a plan to remove their minimums or reduce them, but they never actually got around to doing it, or and it's not very it's not very fine-grained. A city that maybe has removed parking minimums on one street has the same color pin and as a city that might have removed parking minimums over the whole city. So trying to kind of get an idea of what's really happening, it's a little bit harder to do so. And so our purpose of this project is to update this map. The goal is to develop a more normalized format for reporting on these parking minimums. So we're breaking down each report and kind of trying to categorize it a little more granularly to validate and update the reports from that were from Strong Towns. Including finding citations where there aren't any, and as I mentioned, the granularity, and then updating the map interface to have more information in pop-ups and have some kind of highlight more visible information. So the team, which I'll let everyone get a chance to introduce themselves, is listed up here, but we applied for a capstone to work with capstone students from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And we have 3 students, so Maggie, Zane, and Bobby, I guess in order. Go ahead and introduce yourselves and let people know how you got on this project.
Hi, so I'm Maggie. We're all urban studies majors, and I picked this project because I was excited about the mapping and data work. I think it's really cool, and parking is never something I was involved in before, but it just seemed really cool.
Hi, I'm Zane Jacobson. I'm an urban studies student at UAC, and I got interested in parking because this summer I worked for the Colorado Department of Transportation, and we started redoing the Vail Rest area, and we got to parking requirements. So I kind of dipped my toes in a little bit.
Hi, my name's Bobby. I'm also UIC. And I just got really interested in parking reforms when I started to really get into, from Chicago, and I really got into making the city a lot more urban and more Manhattanized, I guess, or New York style. And just really want to make areas more walkable. So I thought it was a really interesting project that you're all doing, and it really fits in well with what I want to do.
Great. We've got their sponsor, the professor that leads their class is Kurt Winkle at UIC. I'm working on this project pretty closely with them. Jane Wilberding has helped write the proposal and is also helping with the direct student work. We have a volunteer, Brad Baker, who is a computer programmer on a bit of a sabbatical, who's going to help with some data exporting and other things. I actually should mention there is another, I just realized another member from the Parking Reform Network, Amin Amos, who did some work for us, exporting some data from a mailbox file, which, sorry, I didn't put him on there. And then we have at Strong Towns, our contact is Daniel. So Daniel, would you like to let us know from the Strong Towns perspective here?
Yeah, I'm glad somebody was able to get that data out of that mailbox file I gave you, because I was just like, here it is, have fun with this. Yeah, we've had this map at Strong Towns for like 6 years, but it is entirely user submitted information. It's just a simple web form, and whatever they give us, we kind of, unless it seems actively unreliable, we put it up on the map. But we know that this map is kind of woefully incomplete at this point. And I think it served its function better than any of us expected, because like I do hear routinely like this gets used in actual, like, planning presentations, in conferences, like it pops up in all these places. So Tony approached me and said, hey, I've got these students who want to do a capstone project, and can we actually regularize this and make it a better resource and get cities in it that really should be in it and aren't? And I said, yes, absolutely. Because I know that there are a lot of omissions, there's out of date information as it stands now, and I'd like it to, I think the function that it serves is just people go, whoa, there's momentum behind this effort to reform parking regulations, and it's happening in cities big and small and all over the continent. So in terms of making that statement, it's great. But yeah, I'm really happy that this is happening.
Thanks. We're using on this project a few pieces of technology. We're using a product called Google Tables, which is like a kind of souped up Google Sheets. It's in beta, but I think it's serving our purpose so far. And then we're planning to use a product called UMap that sits on top of the OpenStreetMap, and that was recommended by Steve Vance, who's in the call here. And the main benefit to the UMap system that when I evaluated it and some other items was that I think we can do a lot more with the pop-ups, like have a lot more detail in the pop-ups, and hopefully we're gonna, like, I believe we should be able to do more with like the icons, so just more data will be able to be kind of discerned automatically from looking at the map. Just to go over quickly some of the things that we're doing to when I mentioned the granular items. So one of the things we really want to do is add a status, or I shouldn't say want to do, that we will be doing is adding, like, we're breaking, when we evaluate a record, it's like, is it proposed? Is it passed? Is it implemented? So like there's more categories in this, but these are just samples of the kinds of things. These aren't comprehensive lists of how we're breaking things down, just to say. By land use, obviously, is this a commercial or residential, and even within residential, kind of some breakdowns of higher or lower density. Magnitude, is this a citywide? Is it on business districts? Is it in corridors? Is it just on one street? And then by like some requirements. So is this a transit oriented development? Is it for, can they get a lot of what we see is, or if you may, I shouldn't say obviously, a lot of cities reduce their parking requirements by requiring things like you can reduce your parking if you have affordable housing, or if you save trees, or if you have car share or bike share on site. So just trying to kind of breakdown, and we have a tagging system in these records so that we can tag each city record with what kinds of reductions are available to then, and then I think we'll synthesize these records into something that shows up on the map and is a little bit more granular. So we're still working this out. We really just today started digging into the, it took us a while to get the data into this table, into a format that we can use, and it's going to be moving forward. And I think, when is the one of the students, when is your capstone project over?
It's over in basically I don't know the exact date. I know it's end of April. So basically 2 months.
So we'll have something. We're I mean, we'll continue working on this after their project ends, but we will be having something going on to show within a few months. We're very excited about this project. What we're doing now, as I mentioned, what's next? We're validating these reports. We're finding the process. If you have ever submitted a record to this in the last 2 years, we will probably be emailing everybody and asking them if they would like to update their records. Or help us to update it. Right now we're going to work through the older ones first and get to that. And then working on the workflow and the map interface design. We have an email if anyone has thoughts or wants to get in touch. And if you're a member and if you're in our Slack, there's a map channel that you are welcome to join where we're coordinating the work on this. So that's very exciting. Next, we have the Parking Benefit District Playbook, which is another project we're working on. And I'm going to hand over, Evan Kindler is going to take over the screen share. And can you take it over or do I need to stop?
You need to stop.
Okay. And then he'll tell you about that.
Spectacular. Hello, my name is Evan Kindler. I'm a recent graduate who luckily ran into Jane at an APA Zoom call, and she recommended to me that I intern for the Parking Reform Network. I was going to say Parking Benefit District. So I created a website basically explaining what a parking benefit district is, where they've been implemented in the past, and how that someone could possibly implement that one in the future. Yeah, so I'll get into it. So essentially, I researched parking benefit districts heavily. You know, how do parking problems manifest themselves? You know, people circling the block, curb space is hard to find, long-term parkers are occupying the best spots, new development causing excess parking occupancy once again, and new garages and lots becoming more and more expensive. So I'm just going to read this page to explain to anyone who doesn't know exactly what a parking benefit district is. So what is a parking benefit district? As parking reform pioneer Donald Shoup describes it, a parking benefit district is an area where the local governing body spends meter revenue for public services in the metered areas. These cities offer each neighborhood a package that includes both priced parking and better public services. Everyone who lives, works, or visits or owns property in a parking benefit district can then see their meter money at work. Charging for parking is central to parking benefit districts. The fee serves two purposes. First, it manages parking, and second, it generates revenue to reinvest into the parking benefit district area. A curb parking space is a limited commodity and should be managed using economic principles such as supply and demand. By charging a market rate price for parking spots in high demand, there will always be an open spot. Generally, 85% occupancy is optimal because it allows enough turnover to guarantee parkers a spot on the same block as their destination. 85% occupancy usually looks like one open spot per block. PBDs are a parking management tool to garner support for this right-priced parking. They aim to make increased parking rates palatable to the public by using a portion of the revenue to improve the surrounding area. If the funds are used to encourage alternative transportation, parking demand will decrease, bringing the price of parking down with it. People often think that creating more parking is the only solution for parking problems. Parking projects are expensive. The average parking garage costs nearly $10 million and invests space towards a concrete monument to car dependence. The vast amount of asphalt and concrete used in parking structures taxes the environment. Their energy intensive production processes releases substantial amounts of CO2 and GHGs. Lots and garages also impede natural water drainage and filtering, causing rain and contaminated pollutants from the parking surface to flow into nearby waterways via the sewer system. The less unnecessary space dedicated to parking, the better. For a much smaller financial and spatial investment, charging correctly for the existing parking generates revenue and solves a myriad of parking issues. So that is a quick intro to what a parking benefit district is. I went through and did various case studies on places where parking benefit districts have been implemented successfully. Old Pasadena in Pasadena, California had a declining downtown area with vacant storefronts. Employees were constantly parked in the most convenient spots in front of the businesses in which they worked, moving their cars every 2 hours to avoid parking time limits. So they had tried to redo the downtown area through a marketing campaign. That hadn't worked. And eventually the city said, we can install meters here. And they got the business owners on board by saying that they would invest 100% of the parking meter revenue back into the metered area. Consistently, these meters have produced $1 to $1.8 million in revenue after operating expenses every single year. To begin the entire renovation process, Old Pasadena took out a $5 million loan to do the Old Pasadena Streetscape and Alleyway project, financing furniture on the street, trees, tree grates, decorative lighting, alley restoration, through the future parking revenue that they were expecting. Besides the parking revenue, tax revenue tripled and sales tax revenues quadrupled within the area. Property tax revenue tripled and sales tax revenue quadrupled. My highlighting there needs a bit of editing. And the nearby shopping districts either went out of business or asked to be zoned in the same way that Old Pasadena had been zoned. Another successful case was on the West Campus in Austin, Texas, where students were essentially just storing their cars long-term in the free parking spots rather than either renting a spot, or they had rented spots, but because the area is so walkable already, they just never needed to move their cars, and it was more convenient to leave them in the free spots on the street. So as a way to deter that and free up those parking spots for visitors or residents or really anyone, the city approached the neighborhood after neighbors had urged some sort of action and said, hey, we can implement a parking benefit district here. We got a $43,000 grant from the EPA, so we're going to try and pilot this project here. So from 2006 to 2011, the 96 meters that they introduced generated $163,000 in the first year, 40,000 of which was spent on sidewalks, curb enhancements, crosswalks, benches, transit shelters, and the two-way bike lane that you can see right here. After that, in 2011, when the parking benefit district was due to expire, the city reintroduced it as a permanent program. Austin also has 3 other similar districts called parking transportation management districts, which function similarly to parking benefit districts, but they allow business improvement districts to apply for them and relax the restrictions a bit on how the revenue can be spent. So for example, in the Colorado River area, the revenue is spent upkeeping the nearby trail, which people who use the trail park within this parking district. Or in East Austin, the revenue was used to repair sidewalks in a busy downtown area. And in Miller, there's a beautiful park that draws a ton of people, so that revenue was spent reinvesting into the park that had previously been upkept by a homeowners association. Pittsburgh serves as another example of a successful parking benefit district. They were having issues with public safety. Parking on the street, because the streets were so narrow, was causing issues with emergency vehicles being able to access areas that they needed to access. People were parking in the nearby residential neighborhoods, and they were subject to muggings. Vehicle break-ins were a very common crime, or occasionally there was a shooting. So the city council president described the PBD as a public safety plan disguised as a transportation plan, essentially implementing the meters only during the weekend rush when people would come to engage in the nightlife there. It has a it has a very high level of alcohol serving permits and bars. So I talked to the nighttime economics manager of Pittsburgh, and she told me that the parking benefit district regularly brings in $210,000 per year, which they spend on lighting, signage, restriping streets. They bought a street sweeper to manage the trash and that was flowing into the nearby river from all the influx of weekend visitors. Crime has dropped 37% since its implementation. There's been a 20% increase in rideshare. Part of the money was spent creating a rideshare pickup and drop off area. And it nears 100% occupancy at its peak, which suggests that the parking meters could be charging more to and still maintain a better manage the parking there. So this is the section of the website that is still under construction. I went through some of the fundamental key elements of a parking benefit district. Obviously the location is very important. The market rate pricing is a key aspect of it. How you spend the revenue that is generated through the meters varies by location. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the parking benefit district is it allows revenue to be very localized and specific for the needs of a certain area. If the parking benefit district is near a residential area, it's suggested that you implement a residential permit program that can also run similarly to a parking benefit district by charging a market rate for that pricing. As well, if you're interested in implementing a PBD, you should have stakeholder workshops that allow you to not only pitch the PBD to various stakeholders, but then hear what they have to say. And signage is very important as a way to, tell people, okay, you're spending this money on parking here. This is what it's going towards. These are the projects that it's improving. There are various key groups, business owners, as you'd expect, have an issue with paid parking because they think they'll lose business. There are various examples where that has not been the case, and instead business has thrived in those areas. PBDs as a tool to, within a wider economic revival, can help manage parking and generate revenue for an area. Drivers and shoppers, obviously no driver wants to suddenly have to pay for parking, but but a market rate price for parking can free up curb space for drivers to then be able to park where they want to park. If not, there's free parking nearby. And hopefully that money will be spent going back into alternative transportation, further reducing the amount of parking necessary and providing other options for people to travel into the PBD. Residents, just like anyone else, they have their concerns with how the money is going to be spent, how much money it's going to cost them. Austin residents specifically worried about commercializing their neighborhood through parking kiosks, or how much of the revenue was going to go to the city and how much of it was going to stay in the district. there's a very clear incentive for them for the parking benefit district, which is their neighborhood will be made much more livable, nice, walkable, and generally a pleasant place to be. Elected officials, it's a win for them. They generate a new source of revenue by taxing almost a luxury tax on the best parking spots, and they are able to then invest that revenue back into the community. Bikers and environmentalists both have an interest in more alternative transportation, which the parking revenue serves there as well. And I'm starting to develop this section of the chapter going into the action plan, the roadmap of implementing a PBD, how PBDs can be used as a tool for equity, and then some of the various challenges that PBDs have faced in implementation in the past. And at the very end, I've added a link library that of the most helpful links that I found for anyone who's interested in learning more about how PBDs function, or various writing. A lot of Donald Shoup work is linked here, or journalism, or the ordinances, or the various web pages that governments have set up for their PBD. I would love any suggestions about what photos I should use in these spaces, because parking photos are hard to find that have anything interesting in them. So far, this is the only one that I have for the signage in Pasadena. Thank you.
I have a suggestion for photos, just if you're interested. Average people don't really find parking that exciting to look at, but the thing that's good about parking reform is that it creates space for other things. So if you can show pictures of street activities, or I don't know, parklets, other things that are happening on the street beside parking that are happening because there's less cars taking up space, that's a good way to fill up space with images that are captivating also.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew.
Angel posted a question in the chat, and Angel, I don't know if you would like to ask it, or it's a good question, which I think there's a section of the site. It was do these will they concentrate wealth, the parking benefit districts?
Yeah, so that's a definite concern with PBDs. That's part of the reason that there is a revenue split with PBDs. Generally, 51% of the revenue from the meters is reinvested into the district, and then 49% goes into a wider city fund. Ideally, that money would be spent promoting the same things that we would hope would be promoted with the PBD revenue within the PBD, which would be alternative transportation options, sidewalk improvements, bike lanes, maybe even like bioswales, generally anything that makes a city more livable and walkable and the streets more complete. Another idea that Tony and I have discussed, and I'm still kind of developing how I think about it, is the notion that a PBD could be used rather than as extra revenue for a district. A city could tell an area, okay, we're going to stop funding these various things here. You have the option to implement this PBD to, have those funds reinvested into the things that we were previously funding for you, and taking that money that the city had formerly been giving to that district for whatever, and thinking about how that can be used to spread equity throughout the city, similar to the 49% of the meter revenue that generally cities take from the PBD.
Right. One of the aspects there is that I feel like in some cities, like in Portland, for example, like there's already an effort to kind of shift spending priorities to areas that have not received as much investment over time, and so there's just a natural reduction in investment in some neighborhoods, and so it might not even be like a trade-off that is presented directly as we're going to cut your funding, but you can. It is more like you're just naturally we're shifting funding priorities, and if neighborhoods have projects they want done, this is one way they can raise it. I should have also mentioned, if for people who aren't familiar, this is the first proof of concept for a series of kind of sites like this. We're trying out the format of these kind of like idea of there's a parking reform playbook. This is one chapter, and one benefit I think that we can present as an organization is that we can take a little bit more of an aggressive and I think progressive stance on our policy recommendations in these materials rather than what might be produced by a planning firm or something, because we're independent and pushing the envelope. So I'm excited about Evan finishing this up and getting it up so we can get some comments. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, any suggestions? I would love to hear them. Any additional information, I'm always ready to add it in. So give it to me if you have it.
Jonathan, I see your comment in there, and I think what I'll do is we will we'll talk about all the projects in general in a second and how they all tie together, I think, and we'll have Andrew talk about his project he's been working on Andrew is the intern with the longest tenure, and he can talk about his grading parking project that we've been working on. And if you were at our meeting last October, we talked about some of the work he was doing, and so he can show you how he's trying to tie up loose ends on that.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Good to see people, good to see faces. I'm going to talk about what I've been working on. So it's simply kind of been talking about parking benefit districts and parking minimums. When I came into the Parking Reform Network, I came in to look at street meter parking. So, there's a bunch of different aspects to parking, and street meter parking is a big aspect of how downtowns work specifically, or especially. So that is what I have been looking at. Let me see if I can share my screen with you guys. All right, cool. So we started working on making scorecards. These were made a while ago, I believe, by Daniel McKinnon Foster. But this is kind of a template we've been using to show the different aspects of parking, street parking that we would be looking to grade on. So we have on-street parking prices, so kind of rates, technology and management. So to use a pay station, are they old-fangled meters that take coins? Curb space allocation. So this is curb space allocated to bike racks or bike share systems or parklets or so on and so forth. Especially since COVID, we've seen a lot of activity in here, but who knows if that'll be permanent. All of a sudden you can build a big wooden structure in an old parking spot and you can say it's outdoors and people can eat there. So this is an interesting one that we don't have a lot of information on. Equity and inclusion. And revenue allocation, which kind of ties in a lot to what Evan was just talking about. This is Portland's. This is one that Tony did, so I'm pretty confident this has all the correct information. We have Chicago, I believe Jane did this one, so I'm pretty confident this also has all of the correct information. Then I've got just a few more that I've been working on. I snuck Madison in. Originally, the cities that we chose were the cities that have the most Parking Reform Network members, just so it would have a group of people to reach out to with our information to see how this could be used. But I snuck Madison in because it's my hometown, so I just kind of like it. You can see Madison is doing significantly worse than Portland or Chicago. One of the big things, one of the reoccurring data points that I'm missing for a lot of cities is about equity, inclusion, revenue allocation, and a lot of information that's lacking from curb space allocation. In general, cities make information on their meters, parking rates, and hours, and where technology is used pretty available. We go on, we got Austin. Austin, as we were talking about, has a much better score for curbside allocation than, okay, these are bad examples, but the next ones have bad curbside allocation because we just don't know as much about them. San Diego, I kind of scrapped all of the information. We're working on that one. We have Los Angeles. So yeah, equity, inclusion, revenue allocation, basically all of these will have 20s because it's really hard to find information on equity and inclusion programs, other than Austin, again, had one. So that's kind of what I'm working towards having as the final product, or at least kind of a way to share this information with other members. Here's the actual system that we're using. So we have rates and the questions that are asked. So what are the hours? You know, this asks how long you can park in different areas, and each one corresponds to a different number, which then can be put into the worksheet over here and is weighted. So there's an adjusted score that gives you your totals over here. Hopefully we'll be talking with this organization that Tony has been talking about called ParkPad Tool, or the Park Sump, which is an organization in Europe which is doing a pretty similar project. So yeah, we can just look at this. We've got the scores for Madison over here. Let's go over here. So yeah, you can see there's pretty good information for technology. And then when I get to equity and inclusion, there's not a ton. So the next step here is going to be to reach out to different members in each of the cities that I've been working on to see if I can get some help finding information or finding good context to speak to in given cities. And then the other project I've been working on is just some blog posts that are kind of talking about documenting the process of making these scorecards. So I'm going to continue on that. The next one will be about presenting data. So I'm going to have to get this data more presentable and more visually appealing to present. And then after that, kind of asking members what this data can do for you, or what we can do for you, kind of in a broader sense. And that's what I've been working on.
Thanks. And just to say, you know, the kind of Jane and I worked pretty for quite a while on the building out those spreadsheets and kind of categorizing those things. The weighting was a somewhat arbitrary process that I did towards the end. But I think one of the goals here at the end of Andrew's data collection and blog posts is to also release that data for people just to see what we did and to weigh in on it. It's kind of, I felt that the whole process of just even thinking about how you would grade these things was useful in thinking about some topics. And yeah, pointing out, like, it's probably impossible to find because a lot of places aren't the equity data, because places aren't seriously engaging with it, potentially, is one reason why it might be hard to find. Yeah, and Paul asks, might some cities get a high score in some areas, but a low one in other areas? And yeah, that's why we did try to break out these categories. Another reason why we had to do weighting, if you ever end up looking at these spreadsheets, is like some items we had a number of data points for just because we could think of things to ask about that topic, but then it wasn't necessarily the most important topic for that category. And so we really wanted to try and make sure that, you know, like the most important thing mattered. For example, like if you're talking about pricing, you know, how parking curb management, in our opinion, the most important thing is, you know, are you, do you know how do you know what your occupancy data is? Like, that's like a very important question. If you don't know that, a lot of the other things don't matter. So that's weighted pretty heavily, for example.
Los Angeles, for example, has a very high on-street parking price score and really good technology management scores, but pretty much falls apart on curb space allocation, equity inclusion, and revenue allocation. So yeah, it's like a 95 for technology management because they're doing some really interesting dynamic pricing downtown.
Yeah.
So well, it's all what you're looking at.
Thank you, Andrew. So to answer the question, Jonathan asked, how does this all kind of tie together? So they're related, and I don't know if there's a specific relation. Obviously there's a tie between just trying to collect for Andrew's project and the map project are very similar. You know, you almost could use the data collected. We're almost doing a kind of report card for the parking minimums through the map project. Andrew's project, sorry, not Andrew's project, Evan's project is the playbook is more, one of our goals has always been at the Parking Reform Network to produce materials for activists to use. And so trying to figure out what format those materials are and how they're organized. So his project, Evan's project, is really based like, I'm a person interested in parking reform in my community, in my community. I've heard about parking benefit districts. Where can I get like activist's guide to how to implement these? And then ideally people become a member of the organization and tie in with other people who've done this and get advice and support and can move this forward in their community. So that's, if that answers your question, Jonathan, I don't know. Yeah. So we've got a little bit of extra time, and I don't know if anyone else has questions. I know we were hoping, Don Shoup had signed up, but I guess maybe didn't lost the link or got busy. I don't know, because Evan had a question for him. But maybe, Evan, you want to ask the other assembled parking experts here and parking thinkers about your question about PBDs.
Great. Yeah. So in one of Shoup's many pieces that I've read on PBDs, he says elected officials can get behind PBDs because they depoliticize parking. He goes on to elaborate slightly, saying that liberals can get behind it because it funds public services, and conservatives can get behind it because it lets the free market decide prices. So I was going to ask him to elaborate. I can't say elaborate today. To elaborate, to explain a little more what he means by depoliticizing parking. I think, even charging the right price for parking is political in a sense. And I was hoping that someone might have some insight into that.
Anyone want to take that? I feel like Evan might have some thoughts on that if no one else does.
I do have some thoughts.
The other
I was
Evan.
hoping for other people's thoughts.
No, there's another Evan in here.
Oh, okay. Lovely.
I had some thoughts.
Oh, and
I'll
Paul
let
too.
Paul
Yeah.
go. I'll let Paul go.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Okay, thanks. Just very briefly, I don't particularly have an answer to that question, but I once did blog about this issue that parking reform kind of sometimes brings together some strange bedfellows, in that you get the sort of the libertarian style thinking, deregulation of parking minimums appeals to some libertarian-minded people. And so I guess Donald Shoup in that paragraph is trying to allude to that kind of thing, that we can at least appeal to various people, regardless of their value system, and get them in. But yeah, I think it's unrealistic to say we're going to depoliticize it. But it is a surprisingly eclectic in its appeal across the political spectrum.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, and other Evan here. Yes, and both its appeal and its opposition. It's very interesting to watch that public discussion go. And I think that in my experience working with cities reforming parking, people use their availability heuristic of saying, I was frustrated by parking once, and therefore my solution is to have lots of parking everywhere and for it to be free. And it's a very non-policy anecdata approach to it. So yeah, I've done some writing about language and thinking about things, and one of the things that I've been drumming on lately on the message boards is pricing by day, or quoting pricing by day, in terms of bringing in the reality of car storage for 8 cents a day seems like an easier thing to sell than, oh, a parking permit for $30 a year. Like if people realize the tiny bit amount of money that parking permits generally cost. So yeah, and some other language thoughts that I've shared with the Slack group. But yeah,
Sorry, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say that's I go into parking permits a bit on the website about how ideally parking permits wouldn't cost 8 cents a day, and ideally they would also be charged a market rate for the curb space that they are taking up.
Yeah, and I did pitch this to the local Cascade Policy Institute, which is a libertarian think tank out here, and they were not at all interested. And it was Cato, to their credit, has published some good things as far as the libertarian group, libertarian voice, but yeah, there's no ideological consistency among anyone, myself included. So
Great. Angel has a request in the chat of people. They've got organizations that we should be reaching out to try to increase our approach. And we're trying to really build a list of organizations specifically, I shouldn't say specifically, but especially, in different identities and communities that we don't have as much representation of. So that would be great. And also Andrew, I thought Sean Sweat, I think you might know, Andrew has a request in the chat for a Phoenix landmark for his picture on his report card.
Just a really fun request, not related to parking in any way.
And then I'm going to share my screen here. The next, is this information right, Mike? The next event is on March 30th.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes, same time as this one about parking cash out in Washington D.C. We'll be sending out announcement about that, and the guest speaker was in here for a little bit, but she has left, I believe. But Mike, I don't know if you want to say anything about your event coming up.
Well, we're in the planning stages, but I'm excited to hear Cheryl speak. There's a successful parking cash out campaign in DC where I live, and I think it's going to be an interesting topic to talk about, especially now that we're thinking about maybe a return to a new normal, like with the vaccine coming out and potentially people going back to work. So how do we distribute benefits that normally go to parking benefits towards walking and biking and carpooling, taking transit to work instead? So.
Great. I'm excited about this because I want Portland to implement a cash out policy as soon as possible. And I'm going to try to get my, my city commissioner staff to come to that event too. Last thing before we go, I'm going to put this in the chat, and we'll probably email you if you register for this event, but we would like to, if I can find the chat, get some feedback about our events. So there's a very quick survey, just a few questions. And if you would be so kind as to fill that out, that would be excellent. And otherwise we're pretty much on time. So I hope this was fun for people.
Yeah, thanks so much for putting this together.
Okay, well, thanks to the students and interns for working on these projects and spending their time on to come hang out in Zoom with everybody.